Asterisk, asterisk, Part 1. Cold wind over the prairie. Asterisk, asterisk. The wind cut through the Wyoming territory like a blade that winter of 1878, carrying with it the promise of harder times to come. Sarah Whitman pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood in the doorway of the Circle M Ranch cookhouse, watching the last light bleed from the western sky. The gray grass stretched endlessly toward the horizon, dusted with a thin layer of snow that refused to melt or deepen, just lingered like an unwelcome guest. She had been too cold to cry for 3 months now, not since the day they'd lowered Thomas into the frozen ground. His lungs finally surrendered to the consumption that had stalked him across 2 territories. Not since she'd sold their small homestead for barely enough to pay debts and buy passage to this place where nobody knew her story, where she could be just another pair of hands in the kitchen, invisible and useful. The cookhouse stove glowed red through its iron belly, the only warm thing for miles. Sarah had learned to husband that heat like a miser counts coins, every log measured, every coal preserved. The men would be coming in soon, stomping snow from their boots and bringing with them the smell of horses, leather, and endless work. "Ma'am," a voice, quiet but firm, pulled her from her thoughts. Cole Brennan stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand despite the cold. The Circle M's foreman had a way of moving that made no sound, appearing like a ghost when least expected. His face bore the marks of 30-odd winters, maybe more, carved deep around eyes the color of winter sage. "The men'll be in directly," she said, not quite meeting his gaze. It was easier that way. Easier to be the efficient widow who kept the coffee hot and the biscuits from burning. "Supper's ready." "That's not why I'm here." Cole shifted his weight, and she noticed the way he favored his left leg, an old injury that acted up in the cold. "Mr. Morrison wants to see you. Up at the main house." Sarah's hand stilled on her apron. In 3 months, she'd been summoned to the main house exactly once, the day she'd arrived. Morrison was a fair employer but distant, running his ranch like a general commands an army. His son Garrett handled most of the day-to-day operations, strutting around like a bantam rooster in expensive boots. "Did he say why?" "No, ma'am, just said to fetch you before supper." The walk to the main house took them past the horse corral where a dozen mustangs milled restlessly. Something had them spooked ears flat, nostrils flaring at the wind. Cole noticed it too, his eyes scanning the darkening prairie. "Wolves?" Sarah asked. "Maybe," but his tone suggested doubt. "Been too quiet lately, no sign of them near the sheep pen, and that's where they'd go first." The Morrison house squatted on a low rise like a fortress, built of logs thick as a man's waist and chinked tight against the weather. Light spilled from its windows, warm and yellow as butter. Sarah had never envied the wealth it represented, but on nights like this, she envied its walls. Garrett Morrison answered the door, his smile sharp as a skinning knife. "Well, if it isn't our kitchen angel, come to warm us with your presence." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, lingering on the places where her dress pulled tight from work. "Your father sent for me," she said, keeping her voice level. "Indeed, he did." Garrett stepped aside with an exaggerated bow. "Do come in. We wouldn't want you to catch cold, though I hear you're already too cold for some things." The word stung, but Sarah had weathered worse. In a territory where unmarried women were scarcer than rain, a widow who kept to herself drew speculation like a lightning rod draws strikes. She'd heard the whispers frigid, broken, probably barren too. Let them talk. Words were just wind. Morrison's study was all leather and smoke, dominated by a map of the territory marked with brands and boundaries. The old man sat behind a desk scarred by years of use, his face weathered but sharp-eyed beneath gray brows. "Mrs. Whitman, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair. "Cole, stay. This concerns you too." Sarah perched on the edge of the offered seat, back straight as a fence post. Morrison poured 3 glasses of whiskey without asking, pushing one toward her. She left it untouched. "We've got trouble," Morrison said without preamble. "Lost 60 head from the north pasture. Whole bunch. Gone between sunrise and sunset yesterday. Jake found the tracks this morning." Cole leaned forward. "Rustlers?" "Has to be. But here's the peculiar thing, they didn't drive them toward any of the usual routes. Tracks head northeast, toward the Badlands. Nobody runs stolen cattle through there unless they're desperate or stupid. Or unless they know something we don't," Cole said quietly. Morrison nodded. "My thoughts exactly. Someone's got a plan, and they've got inside knowledge. Those cattle were in our most remote pasture. Only the hands knew they were there." "You're saying it's one of ours?" Garrett's voice cut sharp from the doorway where he lounged. "That's a serious accusation. Father—" "I'm not accusing anyone yet." Morrison's eyes moved between the 3 of them. "But I'm not naive either. Mrs. Whitman. You serve every meal, hear every conversation. Have you noticed anything unusual? Anyone talking about money troubles, debts, plans to leave?" Sarah considered carefully. The cookhouse was indeed a crossroads of information, men talking freely over coffee and beans. But she'd learned long ago that a woman survived by knowing when to be deaf and blind. "The men complain about wages, weather, and women," she said. "Same as anywhere. Nothing that struck me as unusual." Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Listen to her, playing coy. I bet she hears plenty. Don't you, sweetheart? All those lonely cowboys pouring out their hearts over your biscuits." "That's enough." Cole's voice was soft but carried weight. "Mrs. Whitman's done nothing to earn your disrespect." The younger Morrison straightened, hand moving instinctively toward his hip. "And who are you to tell me how to talk? Just because my father made you foreman doesn't mean—" "I said enough." Morrison Sr.'s voice cracked like a whip. "We've got real problems without you 2 bickering like schoolboys. Garrett, ride to town tomorrow. See if anyone's been flashing unexpected money. Talk to Silas Dorn at the stockyard. Find out if anyone's tried to move cattle without proper papers. Dorn's a snake." Cole said, "If someone's moving stolen beef, he'd be the first to know and the last to tell." "Then be persuasive." Morrison replied, "Mrs. Whitman, I want you to keep your ears open. Anything unusual, you report directly to Cole or myself, not Garrett. Understand?" The distinction wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Garrett's face darkened, but he held his tongue. "I understand," Sarah said. "Good. There's one more thing." Morrison pulled a letter from his desk. "Got word from the Territorial Marshal's office. They're warning all the big ranches about a group calling themselves the Night Riders. Professional rustlers. Possibly with connections to corrupt officials. They hit the double bar last month. Took 200 head. Ranch never recovered them." The room fell silent except for the pop of wood in the fireplace. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. "If it's them," Morrison continued, "we're not just facing theft. We're facing war." Back in the cookhouse, Sarah found the men already gathered, drawn by hunger and habit. Jake Morrison, no relation to the owner despite the name, was holding court near the stove. His boyish face animated as he described finding the tracks. "Strangest thing," he said, accepting a plate from Sarah with a grateful nod. "The way they moved those cattle, it was like they knew every gulch and wash, avoided all the muddy spots where tracks would show clear, only found them by pure luck when my horse spooked at a rattler den." Ben Fletcher, old enough to be grandfather to half the crew, studied his coffee like it might hold answers. "In my time, I've seen plenty of rustling, but this," he shook his gray head, "this is different. Too clean, too smart." "Maybe they got help," suggested Will Tanner, the newest hand. "Someone drawing them maps, telling them where to hit." The suggestion fell into sudden silence. Men looked at each other sideways, suspicion blooming like a poisonous flower. Sarah felt the shift in atmosphere, the easy camaraderie curdling into doubt. That's fool talk, Cole said, entering with a blast of cold air. We start pointing fingers at each other. We do the rustlers' work for them. Everyone here's earned their place. Until proven otherwise, we're all Circle M. The men relaxed fractionally, but the seed was planted. Sarah saw it in the way they drew into smaller groups, longtime friends closing ranks. She served in silence, listening to the undercurrents. Someone mentioned seeing strange riders on the eastern boundary. Another had noticed horse tracks where no Circle M rider should have been. After supper, as the men dispersed to the bunkhouse, Cole lingered. He helped without being asked, carrying water from the pump while Sarah scrubbed plates. "Thank you," she said, "for earlier, with Garrett. He had no call to speak to you that way." Cole set the bucket down carefully, mindful of her clean floor. Boy needs to learn the difference between strength and cruelty. He's not the first to think a widow's fair game. The words came out bitter than intended. Won't be the last. No, Cole agreed. But he'll mind himself around you while I'm foreman. That's a promise. Sarah looked at him then. Really looked. In the lamplight, she could see the weariness he carried like a second skin. Whatever drove Cole Brennan, it wasn't simple ambition or wages. There was a weight to him, a careful way he held himself apart even while standing close. "Why do you care?" The question escaped before she could catch it. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I've seen what happens when nobody does. When the strong take what they want and call it natural law. Watched it happen once, won't watch it again." The wind gusted, sending snow devils dancing across the darkened yard. From the stable came the restless stamping of horses, and further out, the low moan of cattle huddled against the cold. "Storm coming," Cole said. "Big one. From the feel of it, we'll need all hands to keep the stock from drifting. Might lose some of the weaker calves. I'll have coffee ready before dawn. Biscuits and molasses for quick eating." "You always do." He touched his hat brim, a gesture of respect that warmed her more than any flowery compliment could have. "Lock the door tonight. Both doors. And keep the shotgun handy." "You think they'll come here to the ranch proper?" "I think desperate men do desperate things. And whoever took our cattle, they're not done." This was just the opening move. After he left, Sarah stood alone in her domain of cast iron and flour sacks. The stove's heat barely reached the corners where frost already gathered. She touched the place where her wedding ring used to rest, a habit she couldn't break. Thomas had been a dreamer, always looking beyond the next hill for better land, richer soil, an easier life. It had killed him in the end, that restless hunger for something more than what they had. She wouldn't make that mistake. Here in this kitchen, she had work, wages, and walls between her and the territorial wind. It wasn't a life that would inspire ballads, but it was survival. And for a woman who'd already buried one husband and 2 stillborn children, survival was enough. The wind rose higher, rattling the stovepipe and finding every crack in the walls. Sarah banked the fire carefully, checked the locks, and placed the shotgun within easy reach. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, rustlers, storms, and the constant dance of keeping rough men fed while maintaining her distance. But tonight, she had warmth, shelter, and the small, fierce pride of being needed. In a land that broke the weak and buried the careless, it was more than many could claim. The lamp flickered as she turned it down, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, something howled wind or wolf. She couldn't tell. Either way, morning would come soon enough, and with it, the need to face whatever the territory would throw at them next. Sarah Whitman pulled her shawl tight and climbed the narrow stairs to her small room above the kitchen. Too cold to cry, perhaps, but not too cold to endure. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2. Fire and Discipline, asterisk, asterisk. The bell rang at 4:30 sharp, its bronze voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like an axe through kindling. Sarah was already up, had been for an hour. coaxing life back into the cookhouse stove and setting dough to rise. The rhythms of ranch life had seeped into her bones over the past weeks, the bell, the boots on boards, the creak of leather and complaint of cold horses. By the time the first cowboy stumbled in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, she had coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and biscuits turning golden in the Dutch oven. The men came in waves, the early crew who'd draw the short straw for ice-breaking duty, then the regular hands, and finally the late shift who'd spent the night riding herd. "Morning, Mrs. Whitman." Ben Fletcher was always first, his weathered hands wrapped gratefully around a tin cup. "That coffee smells like salvation itself." "Just coffee, Ben, same as yesterday." "No, ma'am. Yesterday's didn't have that hint of cinnamon. Don't think I didn't notice." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The old cowboy missed nothing. Filed away every detail like a squirrel hoarding nuts. In another life, he might have been a scholar or a detective. Out here, he was just another hand with sharp eyes and a careful tongue. The morning rush was a dance she'd perfected: pour coffee, flip biscuits, slice salt pork, dollop molasses, pour more coffee. The men ate quickly but gratefully, fuel for bodies that would work until dark. She caught fragments of conversation between the clink of forks on tin plates. "Ice is 3 inches thick on the water tank." "Daddy saw tracks again near Settler's Creek." "Yeah, horse through a shoe. Need to see the farrier." Cole came in with a second wave, snow dusting his shoulders. He nodded his thanks for the coffee, but his eyes were already distant, calculating the day's work. Sarah had learned to read the signs. The tighter set of his jaw meant trouble. The slight favor of his left leg meant the old injury was acting up. The way he unconsciously checked the window meant he was worried about weather. Storm held off, she observed, refilling his cup. "For now, but look at the sunrise." She glanced through the frost-etched window. The eastern sky was striped in shades of red and purple, beautiful but ominous. "Red sky at morning," she murmured. "Sailors take warning," Cole finished. "My grandmother used to say that. Course, she'd never seen an ocean. Just Kansas prairie far as the eye could reach." It was the most personal thing he'd shared, this glimpse of a grandmother in a childhood somewhere in Kansas. Sarah found herself hungry for more, but knew better than to push. Men like Cole Brennan parceled out their histories like winter rations, sparingly and only when necessary. "Jake," Cole called to the young hand, "you'll help Mrs. Whitman today." Jake Morrison nearly choked on his biscuit. "Sir, I'm supposed to ride the eastern boundary with Will." "Will can manage alone. Mrs. Whitman needs supplies from the root cellar brought up, and that pump handle's been sticking. You know your way around tools." The boy's face fell. Kitchen duty was considered soft work, unsuitable for a cowboy with ambitions. But he nodded, knowing better than to argue with the foreman. "Don't look so glum," Sarah said quietly as Cole left. "I might even teach you to make bear sign." Jake perked up slightly. "The fried dough, the kind Cookie used to make on the double bar." "The very same." The morning progressed with unexpected smoothness. Jake proved to be good company, chattering about his family's ranch up near the Powder River, his dreams of one day running his own spread. His hands were clever with the pump, diagnosing and fixing a worn leather washer that had been causing the stick. "My ma would tan my hide if she knew I could fix pumps," he admitted, wiping grease from his hands. "Always after me to learn practical things, not just riding and roping." Smart woman. Sarah kneaded dough for the noon meal, her movements automatic after months of practice. "A man who can't maintain his own place won't keep it long." That's what Cole says a foreman needs to know every job on the ranch, from shoeing horses to birthing calves. Jake's voice carried a note of hero worship. He weren't always foreman, Started as a hand like anyone else, back when old Morrison first claimed this land. This was news to Sarah. How long ago was that? 10 years, maybe 12. Cole never talks about what came before. Some say he was in the war. Others think maybe he wore a badge somewhere. But Morrison trusts him, and that's enough for most. Not for Garrett. Jake's expression darkened. Garrett thinks the ranch should run like those big operations back east. All ledgers and lawyers. Doesn't understand that out here, loyalty matters more than law. The noon bell brought the men back in shifts. Sarah had learned to prepare food that could wait without ruining stews, beans, cornbread that stayed moist. Today's offering was a thick beef and vegetable soup, using the last of the winter vegetables from the root cellar. Lord have mercy. Is that carrot I see? Will Tanner peered into his bowl like a prospector spotting gold. Haven't had proper vegetables since October. Thank Jake, Sarah said. He hauled them up from storage. The young cowboy blushed at the praise, then blushed deeper when the other hands began ribbing him about his promotion to kitchen assistant. But the teasing was good-natured. In a world where meals were often monotonous, any variety was appreciated. Garrett Morrison arrived with the last shift, his presence changing the atmosphere like a cloud over the sun. He helped himself to soup without acknowledgement, taking the chair closest to the stove, Cole's usual spot. Quite the domestic scene, he drawled, eyes moving between Sarah and Jake. Teaching the boy to cook. Are we planning to turn all our cowboys into kitchen maids? Man should know how to feed himself, Ben Fletcher said mildly. Less he wants to starve when he's line riding alone. That's what we have her for. Garrett jerked his chin toward Sarah. Though I wonder what other services she might provide, given proper encouragement. The room went still. Sarah felt the familiar cold settle in her chest, the protective numbness that had served her well these past months. But before she could respond, Jake was on his feet. You take that back. The boy's voice shook, but his fists were steady. Mrs. Whitman's a lady, and you'll speak to her as such. Garrett laughed, a sound like ice breaking. A lady, she's hired help. Boy, just like you, just like all of us. When you get down to it, only difference is what we're hired to do. That's enough. Cole stood in the doorway, and Sarah hadn't heard him come in. His voice was quiet, conversational almost, but something in it made Garrett's hand drop to his side. Jake, go help Ben with the horses. Mrs. Whitman. Might I have a word? Sarah followed him outside, aware of the eyes tracking their movement. The wind had picked up, driving small, hard pellets of snow like buckshot. I apologize for Garrett, Cole said once they were out of earshot. I'll speak to his father. Don't! The word came out sharper than intended. It would only make things worse. I've handled worse men than Garrett Morrison. Cole studied her, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he saw more than she intended to show. I don't doubt it, but you shouldn't have to. Not here, not while I'm foreman. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it, the same one she'd asked before. Why does it matter to you? He was quiet for a long moment, watching the horizon where dark clouds massed like an army. Had a sister once, younger than me by 6 years. Sweet girl. Always laughing, always seeing the good in people. His voice went distant, lost in memory. She married a man who talked smooth and smiled easy. By the time I came back from the war, she was in the ground. He said she fell down the stairs. Sarah's hand moved involuntarily to her throat. I'm sorry. Town believed him. Sheriff believed him. 6 months later, his new wife had an accident too. That time, I didn't wait for the law. Cole's eyes came back to the present, to her. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'll not stand by again while a man mistakes kindness for weakness. The wind gusted between them, carrying the smell of coming snow and distant trouble. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter, processing this glimpse into Cole Brennan's past. A soldier, a brother, a man who'd taken justice into his own hands. It should have frightened her. Instead, she felt oddly safer. I'm not your sister, she said quietly. I'm not sweet, and I stopped laughing the day I buried my husband. Whatever kindness I had died with my children." "Did it?" Cole's question was gentle. "Then why take extra care with Ben's coffee when his joints ache? Why teach Jake to cook when it's not your job? Why notice that Will favors foods that remind him of home?" Sarah had no answer to that. The small acts of care were automatic, woven into her days without thought. They meant nothing. They had to mean nothing. "The men respect you," Cole continued, "not because Morrison pays them to, but because you see them as men, not just hands. That matters out here. Matters more than you might think." From the bunkhouse came the sound of argument, Garrett's voice raised in anger, others trying to calm him. Cole's expression hardened. "I need to handle that, but Mrs. Whitman Sarah." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Don't let men like Garrett make you smaller than you are. This ranch needs more than just someone who can cook. It needs what you bring. Don't forget that." He touched his hat and strode toward the bunkhouse, leaving Sarah alone with the wind and her tumbling thoughts. She returned to the kitchen to find Jake had snuck back, ostensibly to fetch something, but really to make sure she was all right. "I'm sorry about what I said," the boy stammered. "About you being a lady. I didn't mean to presume." "You defended my honor," Sarah said, surprised to find warmth in her voice. "My husband would have done the same. Thank you." Jake's face lit up like she'd handed him gold. Could you really teach me to make bear sign? The men would be so surprised if I could make them for the Sunday supper." "Despite everything," Sarah found herself almost smiling. "Fetch the lard and I'll show you. But pay attention, it's all in the temperature. Too hot and they burn. Too cool and they're greasy." They worked together as the afternoon light slanted low. Jake's enthusiasm infectious as he mastered the trick of stretching the dough thin and sliding it into the hot fat. The kitchen filled with the sweet smell of frying dough and cinnamon sugar. "My mom makes these for Christmas," Jake said, carefully turning a golden round. "Says her mother learned from a chuck wagon cook on the Goodnight Trail." "Food carries memories," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes the only home we have is what we can create around a meal." The supper bell brought the men in to find an unexpected treat fresh bear sign piled high on a platter, still warm and dusted with sugar. The surprise and delight on their faces was worth the extra work. Even Garrett, still nursing his anger from earlier, couldn't resist taking two. "Jake made them," Sarah announced, and enjoyed watching the boy try to appear nonchalant while pride radiated from every pore. After supper, as the men headed to the bunkhouse for their evening rituals of cards and storytelling, Cole lingered again. It was becoming a pattern. These moments of shared quiet while she cleaned and he pretended to check supplies. "Storm will hit tonight," he said. "I'll have men watching the herd in shifts. Might lose some to the cold. I'll keep coffee ready through the night." Sarah dried the last plate, hanging it on its hook. "And maybe some of Jake's bear sign for the night riders." "They'd appreciate that." Cole hesitated, then added, "What I told you earlier, about my sister, I'd be obliged if you kept that between us." Of course. Sarah understood the weight of shared secrets, how they could bind or burden. Though I suspect Ben knows. That man sees everything. Ben knows everyone's secrets. Part of why he's lived so long, he knows which ones to keep. They stood in comfortable silence, watching through the window as snow began to fall in earnest. Fat flakes at first, then smaller, driven ones as the wind picked up. The temperature was dropping fast. Sarah could feel it in the way the stove struggled to hold heat. "I should go," Cole said finally. "Long night ahead. You'll lock up." "Always do." He turned to leave, then paused. "What you said earlier, about being too cold to cry, I understand that. Felt that way myself for a long time after what happened. But cold preserves things. Sarah, keeps them from healing proper. Sometimes we need a little warmth to thaw what's frozen, even if it hurts." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the swirling snow. Sarah stood alone in her kitchen kingdom, surrounded by the familiar smells of coffee and lard and wood smoke. Outside, the storm was building, promising a hard night for man and beast alike. But inside, warmed by more than just the stove, something deep in her chest gave a tiny, painful shift. Not quite a thaw, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of one. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 3. Strange hoof prints, asterisk, asterisk. Cole Brennan crouched in the muddy wash, his fingers tracing the outline of a hoof print preserved in the half-frozen ground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the broken country, highlighting details that would have been invisible in full light. He'd been tracking for 2 hours, following the ghost trail left by the rustlers who'd taken their cattle 3 nights ago. "See here," he said to Jake, who'd accompanied him on this scouting mission. "This print's different. Most cowboys shoe their horses simple plain iron, maybe a heel caulk for winter. But this..." Jake leaned in, studying the impression. The toes turned up. Never seen that before. Called a rocker toe? Specialty work. Maybe a dozen farriers in the whole territory who can forge one proper. Cole stood, his knees protesting the movement. Man who rides a horse shod like this isn't your average drifter. He's particular about his mount. Professional. They followed the tracks another mile, noting how the riders had moved their stolen cattle with practiced efficiency. Every muddy spot avoided, every obvious path ignored. These weren't desperate men making a quick grab. This was planned, executed with military precision. "Mr. Brennan," Jake pointed to a scraped tree trunk. "Look at this." Cole examined the mark bark rubbed away at shoulder height. A few gray hairs caught in the wood. Packhorse, heavily loaded from the height of the scrape. They brought supplies for a long drive. The trail led them to a narrow canyon where the tracks mysteriously vanished. Cole dismounted, studying the ground carefully. Brush had been dragged to obscure prints, and someone had scattered loose rock to confuse the trail. They switched tactics here, he mused. Probably split the herd, sent them different directions. Smart. Makes it harder to track, harder to recover even if we catch up. Jake's young face was troubled. "Who are these men, Mr. Brennan?" "They're not like any rustlers I've heard of." "No," Cole agreed grimly. "They're not." Back at the Circle M, Sarah was elbow deep in bread dough when she heard the commotion from the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. She stepped outside to see a stranger talking with Garrett Morrison near the corral. The man was well-dressed for the territory, too well-dressed. His coat was city-cut, his boots polished despite the mud, and he sat his horse like someone more comfortable in a carriage. "Mrs. Whitman," Garrett called out, his voice carrying that false friendliness she'd learned to distrust. "Come meet Mr. Silas Dorn. He's a cattle buyer from Cheyenne." Dorn touched his hat, a gesture that managed to be both polite and dismissive. "Ma'am, Garrett's been telling me about the Circle M's operations. Impressive spread." Sarah nodded, but said nothing. Something about the man set her teeth on edge. Maybe it was the way his eyes cataloged everything: the buildings, the horses, the handful of cowboys visible in the distance. Or maybe it was the timing. Cattle buyers didn't usually make social calls in the middle of winter, especially not after a major theft. "So, Mr. Dorn's interested in our spring calves," Garrett continued, "offering top dollar, sight unseen." "Generous of him," Sarah said carefully. "Most buyers want to see what they're paying for." Dorn's smile was sharp as a skinning blade. "I trust the Morrison reputation. Besides, I have other business in the area." Seemed efficient to combine purposes. "Other business," Sarah kept her tone neutral, but she filed the information away. "Property investments. The railroad's coming through eventually. Smart man positions himself early." His gaze swept over her again, lingering a moment too long. "I understand you're a widow. Mrs. Whitman my condolences. Hard for a woman alone in the territory. I manage. I'm sure you do. Still, if you ever find yourself in need of assistance, I maintain offices in both Cheyenne and Denver, always happy to help a lady in distress. The offer sounded innocent enough, but Sarah heard the undertone. She'd fielded similar proposals before men who thought a widow must be desperate enough to accept any arrangement. Before she could respond, hoofbeats announced Cole and Jake's return. Cole's expression went carefully blank when he saw Dorn, but Sarah caught the slight tension in his shoulders. He dismounted smoothly, passing his reins to Jake. "Silas," he said with a nod that barely qualified as cordial. "Brennan." Dorn's voice cooled several degrees. "Still playing foreman. I see. Still buying cattle you haven't seen, I notice." The two men faced each other like dogs circling, and Sarah sensed old history between them. Garrett seemed oblivious to the tension, or perhaps he simply enjoyed it. "Mister, Dorn's made a very generous offer for our spring crop," Garrett said. 20% above market price." "Suspicious generous," Cole observed. "Market's been soft all winter. What makes you think it'll recover by spring?" Dorn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's say I have information about upcoming Army contracts, beef for the reservation agencies. Government pays premium for quality stock. Funny, last I heard, those contracts were already spoken for through the Cattlemen's Association. Things change." Dorn gathered his reins. "Think about my offer. Morrison, I'll be staying at the Dry Creek Hotel for the next few days. Always available to discuss business." His eyes flicked to Sarah, or other matters of mutual interest. After he left, trailing Garrett, who seemed eager to continue their conversation, Cole stood staring after them with an expression Sarah couldn't read. "You know him," she said. "It wasn't a question. We've crossed paths. He ran cattle in Nebraska before coming to Wyoming. Always seemed to prosper when others failed. Drought, disease, Indian troubles, nothing touched Silas Dorn's operations. Lucky man." "Yeah, lucky." Cole's tone suggested he thought luck had nothing to do with it. "Jake, see to the horses. Mrs. Whitman. Might I trouble you for coffee? I need to think." In the kitchen, Sarah poured coffee and waited. She'd learned that Cole processed information like a cow chews cud slowly, thoroughly, bringing things up to examine them from different angles. "Those tracks we found," he said finally. "Professional work. The kind of planning that takes resources, connections. And now Dorn shows up, flash with money, buying cattle he hasn't seen." "You think he's connected to the rustlers?" "Can't prove it, but 20% above market, that's not business, that's bribery. Question is, what's he really buying?" Sarah considered this as she kneaded the neglected bread dough. Information. Maybe Garrett seemed mighty friendly with him. Cole's cup stopped halfway to his lips. "Garrett's ambitious, but he's not stupid. He wouldn't betray his own father, would he? Men do all sorts of things when they feel overlooked." Sarah shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "Garrett thinks he should be running this ranch. Thinks you're standing in his way. His father made me foreman because Garrett's not ready. Too quick to anger, too eager to prove himself. Man like that makes mistakes, or makes deals with men like Dorn." They sat in troubled silence until the dinner bell called the men in. The meal was subdued, everyone sensing the undercurrents of tension. Garrett's empty chair seemed to loom large, though no one commented on his absence. After dinner, Sarah was banking the stove for the night when she heard the soft nicker of a horse outside, quickly muffled. Her hand found the shotgun as she peered through the frost-covered window. A shadow moved near the woodpile, too furtive to be one of the hands. Moving quietly, she eased open the back door. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she ignored it, focusing on the figure now trying to jimmy the storeroom window. "That's far enough," she said, pleased when her voice came out steady despite her pounding heart. The man spun hand going for his hip, then froze when he saw the shotgun. In the moonlight, she could make out a lean face, stubbled and hard-used, eyes that calculated odds with professional speed. "Easy there, lady. Just looking for a warm place to sleep." "Funny way to go about it. Hands use the bunkhouse door." "Ain't a hand, just passing through." In the middle of the night through private property, Sarah kept the shotgun steady. "Seems more likely you're looking for something specific. Or someone." The man's expression shifted, a flash of something surprised before settling back into wary calculation. "You're smarter than you look. And you're dumber than you think if you believe I won't use this." He raised his hand slowly. "No need for that. Like I said, just passing through. Made a mistake. I'll be moving on." "Not yet, you won't." Cole's voice came from the darkness, followed by the click of a hammer being cocked. "Sarah, you hurt?" "No, our friend here was trying to get into the storeroom." Cole emerged from the shadows. His coat held steady. "That where you were supposed to look, or were you after something else?" The intruder's jaw tightened. "Don't know what you mean." "Sure you do." Cole's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "See, a drifter looking for shelter tries the barn first. Man trying to steal food goes for the smokehouse. But the storeroom, that's where we keep records. Bills of sale, breeding books, maps, information a man might pay well for." "You're talking crazy." "Am I? Turn around. Slow. Sarah, keep that scattergun on him." Cole searched the man with professional efficiency, finding a knife, a hideout gun, and a leather wallet. He examined the latter by moonlight, whistling soft. Well, Bart Hutchins. Thought I recognized you. Last I heard, you were working for the Pinkertons." "And that was years ago." Hutchins spit. "Man's gotta eat." "Sure, and Silas Dorn pays better than the Pinkertons, doesn't he?" Hutchins' silence was answer enough. "Here's what's going to happen." Cole continued. "You're going to walk to your horse, I assume you left him in the cottonwoods, and ride out. Don't stop until you're out of the territory. I see you again. We'll skip the conversation." "You can't prove nothing." "Don't need to. This is Morrison land. We deal with trespassers our own way." Hutchins looked between them, calculating odds again, then nodded slowly. "My horse is tied by the creek. Sarah, go inside. I'll see our friend off the property." She hesitated, then obeyed, but kept the shotgun ready and watched from the window. Cole marched Hutchins away at gunpoint, returning 15 minutes later. "He's gone," he said, accepting the coffee she offered. "But he'll be back, or others like him. Dorn's not the type to give up easy." "What records would he want from the storeroom?" "Maps, probably. Location of line camps, water sources, which pastures we use when, information worth gold to rustlers." Cole rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "But how'd he know where to look? That storeroom's not marked. From outside, it looks like any other shed." The implication hung heavy between them. Someone had told Hutchins exactly where to go, what to look for, someone with inside knowledge. "I'll post a guard," Cole said finally. "And move the important papers to the main house. Mr. Morrison needs to know about this." "Be careful," Sarah found herself saying. "If Garrett's involved—" "I know. Father-son bonds run deep, but so does greed." He set down his cup, studying her in the lamplight. "You did well tonight. Most would have raised an alarm, brought men running. You kept quiet, kept control. I've faced desperate men before." The words slipped out before she could catch them. Cole waited, but she offered nothing more. Some stories weren't meant for sharing, especially ones that ended with a woman learning exactly how much violence she was capable of when cornered. "I should go," he said finally. "Lock up tight. Tomorrow. I'll teach you some signals, ways to alert the hands without making noise if needed." After he left, Sarah stood in her kitchen, heart finally slowing to normal rhythm. Outside, Wind stirred the cottonwoods with a sound like whispers. The confrontation had shaken something loose inside her, a reminder that she wasn't as numb as she'd believed. She touched the shotgun's worn stock, remembering another night, another desperate man. Thomas had been 3 days dead, and the neighbor who'd helped with the funeral had returned for his payment, the payment he assumed a new widow would be eager to provide. She'd taught him different. That was the night she'd learned she was too cold to cry, but not too cold to survive, not too cold to do what needed doing. Now, listening to the wind and the distant howl of something wild, Sarah wondered if Cole was right. Maybe cold did preserve things that needed to heal. Maybe the warmth she felt from his steady presence, from young Jake's enthusiasm, from Ben's quiet kindness, maybe it was dangerous. But as she climbed the stairs to her small room, shotgun in hand, she found herself thinking of spring, of ice cracking on the creek, of new grass pushing through old snow, of the possibility that some thaws came so slowly you didn't notice until the water was already running free. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 4, Too Cold to Cry Warm Me, here. The blizzard hit just after midnight, screaming down from the northern mountains like all the furies of winter combined. Sarah woke to the sound of wood creaking under the wind's assault, ice pellets rattling against her window like skeletal fingers demanding entry. The temperature had plummeted so fast that frost was already forming on the inside walls. She dressed quickly in the dark, layering everything she owned: chemise, wool dress, 2 shawls, Thomas's old coat that still hung behind the door. Her fingers were already stiff as she fumbled with buttons. The stove downstairs would be nearly dead. She'd need to resurrect it fast or risk frozen pipes and worse. The kitchen was a tomb of cold. Her breath clouded white as she knelt by the stove, coaxing life from the few remaining embers. The wind found every crack in the walls, turning the room into a chorus of whistles and moans. Ice had already formed on the water bucket. Outside, she could hear the men struggling with the stock, voices raised against the wind, the panic of cattle, the sharp crack of ice breaking. This was the storm Cole had been dreading, the one that killed cattle where they stood, that froze cowboys in their saddles. She had coffee boiling and the stove roaring when the first men stumbled in, ice hanging from their beards like Christmas decorations. Ben Fletcher was practically carried by 2 younger hands, his face gray with cold. "Sss, get him by the fire," Sarah ordered, already moving. "Jake, fetch blankets from the supply room. You, help me get his boots off." Ben's feet were white with frostbite, painful to see. Sarah knew better than to rub them that could cause more damage. Instead, she wrapped them in loose cloth and elevated them, letting warmth return gradually. "The cattle," Ben mumbled through chattering teeth. "Drifting south. Cole's trying to turn them." More men staggered in as the night wore on. Sarah kept coffee flowing, distributed what blankets they had, and tried not to think about those still out in the storm. The wind was so fierce now that opening the door required 2 men's strength. It was nearly dawn, though the darkness gave no hint of it. When Cole finally appeared, he moved like a man made of ice, each step deliberate and painful. Snow had frozen his coat solid. It cracked when he tried to remove it. "How many?" Sarah asked, helping him with the frozen buttons. "Lost count. Saved what we could." His voice was hoarse from shouting over the wind. "The rest are in God's hands now." She got him seated by the stove, noticed how his hands shook as they thawed. He'd given his gloves to someone else. She could see the wool fibers frozen to his reddened skin where he'd gripped rope barehanded. "Garrett." The question had to be asked. Safe? Led a group to the eastern shelter. Whatever else Garrett was, he wasn't a coward. "Lost my horse, though. Broke through ice at the creek. Had to walk the last mile." Sarah poured coffee, added a generous splash from the medicinal whiskey she kept for emergencies. Cole took it gratefully, the cup chattering against his teeth. The storm raged through the day. Men came and went in shifts, grabbing what warmth they could before heading back out. Sarah kept food simple and hot beans, coffee, cornbread when she could manage it between crises. The kitchen became a field hospital, treating frostbite, exhaustion, and the peculiar despair that came with watching your livelihood freeze to death. By evening, the wind had died to merely vicious. The temperature, if anything, had dropped further. Water froze within minutes of leaving the stove. The men moved like ghosts, hollow-eyed and stumbling. Even Garrett had lost his swagger, working alongside the others without complaint. It was full dark when Sarah realized Cole hadn't returned from his last shift. She found Jake near the door, ice-rimed and shaking. "Where's Cole?" "Went after strays near the big wash. That was 2 hours ago." 2 hours in this cold was a death sentence. Sarah looked around the kitchen at the exhausted men. None were in shape for a rescue mission. "I'll go," Jake said, struggling to his feet. "You can barely stand." Sarah was already reaching for Thomas's coat. "Which direction?" "You can't," Jake began. "Which direction?" Something in her voice stopped argument. "Northwest. Follow the fence line to the lightning-struck cottonwood. Then bear west to the wash. But ma'am, in this dark..." Sarah was already moving, grabbing a lantern and the emergency pack she'd prepared matches, whiskey, blankets. The shotgun would be useless weight. She left it behind. The cold hit like a physical blow. Within steps, her face was numb, her lungs burning with each breath. The lantern cast a pitiful circle of light in the swirling snow. She followed the fence more by feel than sight, gloved hands trailing along the ice-crusted wire. The lightning-struck cottonwood loomed out of the darkness like a giant skeleton. "West from here," Jake had said. But west was just more darkness, more wind, more cold. Sarah forced herself to think. Cole was experienced, smart. If caught by the storm, he'd seek shelter, probably in the wash where the banks might offer protection. She almost missed him, a dark shape against the snow, huddled in the lee of a cut bank. His horse stood nearby, head down, both of them coated in ice. "Cole!" She had to shout twice before he stirred. His eyes were glazed when they opened, pupils dilated with cold. "Sarah, no. You shouldn't..." "Hush. Can you stand?" He tried, failed, tried again with her support. His left leg wouldn't bear weight, the old injury seized by cold. Together they stumbled to his horse, and she somehow got him mounted, his frozen hands wrapped in the reins. The return journey was a nightmare of wind and stumbling darkness. Sarah led the horse, one hand on the bridle, the other holding the lantern. Several times she lost the fence line and had to backtrack, fighting panic. Cole slumped forward, occasionally mumbling words she couldn't catch. Light in the kitchen window was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Jake must have been watching. He burst out before she could call, bringing others. They carried Cole inside while she tended his horse, automatic actions giving her something to focus on besides the shaking in her legs. When she returned to the kitchen, they'd gotten Cole onto the table near the stove. His color was bad, lips blue, breathing shallow. The men stood around helplessly, these tough cowboys reduced to worried silence. "Out," Sarah ordered. "All of you. Jake, bring more blankets. Ben, if you can manage it. Heat water. The rest of you, go. Too many bodies stealing the heat." They obeyed, grateful for direction. Sarah began the delicate process of removing Cole's frozen clothing, trying not to jar his cold, stiffened limbs. His skin was like marble, white and cold to touch. She'd seen men die from less severe exposure. As she worked, he stirred, eyes focusing with effort. "You came for me." "Hush, save your strength." "No." His hand caught hers, frighteningly weak. "Need to say, I thought I was done. Thought about things, regrets." "Cole? Should have told you about the rustlers. Found more than tracks. Found a surveyor's mark, railroad survey. They're not just stealing cattle. They're clearing land. Sarah processed this while wrapping him in warmed blankets. Dorn. Has to be. Buy the cattle cheap after we're ruined. Then sell the land to the railroad for 10 times what he paid. His voice was fading. Sarah, I'm so cold. She'd gotten him wrapped, but he was shaking now. Violent tremors as his body fought to generate heat. She knew the signs he was past the point where external warmth alone would help. His body core was too cold, system shutting down. You need to be warmer, she said, decision crystallizing. I'm going to help. She shed Thomas's coat and her shawls, kicked off her boots. Before she could think too hard about it, she climbed onto the table, pulling the blankets around them both, pressing her warmth against his frozen body. He made a sound of protest. Not proper. Proper be damned. You're not dying on my watch. She held him as he shook, her arms around him under the blankets, trying to will her warmth into him. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the tremors eased. His breathing deepened. Color began returning to his face. It was then, in that strange intimate cocoon of shared warmth and desperate circumstance, that something broke inside Sarah. The frozen thing she'd carried since Thomas died, since she'd stood over too many small graves, since she'd learned that the world was cold and caring was just another way to hurt. I'm cold too, she whispered against his shoulder. Been cold so long, too cold to cry, too cold to feel, but you make me want to be warm again. His arms came around her, weak but present. Sarah! She pulled back enough to see his face, found his eyes clear now, fully aware. With trembling hands, she took one of his and placed it over her heart. Warm me, she said, the words coming from some deep, desperate place. Here, where I've been frozen longest. His hand spread over her heart, palm warm through the wool of her dress. You saved me. We saved each other. They stayed like that, wrapped in blankets and the strange peace that comes after surviving what should have killed you. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, in their small circle of warmth, something new kindled to life. Not passion, they were both too exhausted, too aware of boundaries not yet ready to cross, but connection, recognition. The first tentative trust between two people who'd forgotten how to trust. The door crashed open, admitting Garrett and a swirl of snow. He stopped dead at the scene Sarah and Cole wrapped together on the table, clearly in a state of undress beneath the blankets. What in the hell? Treating hypothermia, Sarah said calmly, though her cheeks burned, as any fool who's wintered in the territory should recognize. Garrett's face went through several expressions before settling on ugly satisfaction. Oh, I recognize something all right. Wait until my father hears about this. Hear about what? Cole's voice was stronger now, carrying an edge. That Mrs. Whitman saved my life, that she risked herself in a blizzard when no one else could. Yes, tell him that. I'll tell him what I saw. His foreman and the cook carrying on like two people trying not to die, Ben Fletcher said from the doorway. The old cowboy must have heard the commotion. I've seen it done many times on the trail. Sometimes skin warmth is all that stands between a man and freezing. Nothing improper about survival. Others had gathered behind Ben, drawn by the raised voices. Jake pushed forward, young face indignant. Mrs. Whitman went out in that storm when none of us could. Found him, brought him back. You should be thanking her, not. I don't need lessons in gratitude from a boy, Garrett snarled. But he was outnumbered, and he knew it. The hands stood solid behind Sarah, their loyalty clear. This isn't over, he said finally, and slammed back out into the storm. After he left, the tension eased. Sarah carefully extracted herself from the blankets, trying to maintain some dignity. Ben tactfully ushered the others out, leaving her to help Cole dress in the dry clothes Jake had fetched. Thank you, Cole said quietly as she buttoned his shirt with fingers that only trembled a little. For everything, for coming after me, for He gestured at the table, the blankets, the space where they'd held each other. For being willing to thaw. Sarah met his eyes, saw in them the same recognition she felt that something fundamental had shifted between them. They'd crossed a line, not of propriety but of solitude. The careful distances they'd maintained were no longer possible. "We go slow," she said. "We keep our honor, but Cole, I don't want to be cold anymore." He caught her hand, pressed it briefly to his lips. "Then we'll find ways to stay warm, proper ways, honorable ways, but warm nonetheless." Later, after he'd been helped to the bunkhouse and she'd restored order to her kitchen, Sarah stood at the window watching the storm. Her reflection stared back a woman with color in her cheeks, life in her eyes, not the frozen widow who'd arrived here months ago. The wind still howled. Cattle still died in the dark. Come morning, they'd count their losses and face whatever Garrett's spite would bring. But tonight, in defiance of the cold that killed, 2 people had chosen warmth. It was, Sarah thought, a beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 5. Unmasking and the Fatal Blow. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning after the storm broke cold and crystal clear, revealing a landscape transformed. Drifts piled high against buildings, fence lines buried, and dark shapes dotting the white expanse where cattle had fallen. The survivors huddled in whatever shelter they'd found, bawling weakly for feed that would be hard to deliver. Cole stood at the corral gate, tallying losses in his mind while his body still ached from near freezing. 60 head at least, maybe more. The Circle M could survive it, but barely. Another hit like this would break them. "Brennan!" Morrison Sr.'s voice cracked like a whip across the yard. The old man strode through the snow, face darker than Cole had ever seen it. "My office, now!" Cole followed, noting Garrett's satisfied smirk from the porch. So the son had carried tales to the father. No surprise there. Morrison's office still smelled of leather and smoke. But this morning, it felt like a courtroom. The old man stood behind his desk, hands flat on the scarred surface. "Garrett tells me there was an incident last night with Mrs. Whitman." "She saved my life," Cole said simply. "Risked her own to find me in the storm." "That's not all she did, according to my son. Your son saw what he wanted to see. A man dying of cold needs warmth. Mrs. Whitman provided it. Ask Ben Fletcher or any trailhand, they'll tell you it's common practice." Morrison studied him with those sharp eyes that missed little. "And is that all it was, practical necessity?" Cole met his gaze steadily. "What else could it be?" "Don't play games with me. Boy, I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you. I'm not blind." "No, sir, you're not. So you've also seen how she works herself raw, keeping your men fed. How she's never asked for special treatment, never complained about wages or conditions. How the men respect her, would ride through hell for her. That worth anything to you?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The eastern pasture. We lost another 40 head last night, but not to the storm. Clean theft, professional work, right under our noses while we fought the blizzard." Cole felt his gut tighten. Same pattern. Same pattern. Worse. Garrett was supposed to be watching that section. Claims he had to pull back because of the weather, but... Morrison shook his head. "I'm sending you out with a search party. Take your best trackers. Find me something I can use." "Yes, sir. About Mrs. Whitman. She stays, for now. But Cole, I run a ranch, not a romance novel. Keep it professional or find other employment. Both of you." Cole nodded and left, finding Jake waiting with horses already saddled. Word traveled fast on a ranch. Along with Jake, he'd picked Will Tanner and, surprisingly, Ben Fletcher, who insisted he was fine despite yesterday's frostbite. They rode east through a glittering world of ice and snow. The storm had wiped away old tracks but might have preserved new ones. Cole felt the familiar focus of the hunt settle over him. pushing aside thoughts of Sarah's warmth, the trust in her eyes when she'd placed his hand over her heart. "There," Will called out. "Edge of that draw." The tracks were fresh, post-storm. At least 6 riders moving fast, driving cattle toward the broken country. But it was the clear impressions in a wind-sheltered spot that made Cole dismount for a closer look. "I'll be damned," Ben muttered. "Military formation. Look at the spacing, the way they held position, even pushing cattle. These aren't just rustlers." Cole studied the prints, then froze. There, clear as day, the rocker toe horseshoe, but beside it, something even more telling. A square nail pattern he recognized, unique to the Circle M's own forge. "Jake," he said quietly. "Whose horse threw a shoe yesterday? Who needed emergency re-shoeing?" Jake's young face went pale. "Mr. Garrett's mare. Said he'd do it himself. Didn't want to bother the hands during the storm." The implications hung heavy between them. Cole weighed options. Loyalty to the brand against growing certainty. "We followed the tracks. See where they lead. Nobody says anything until we're sure." They rode in grim silence, following the trail into increasingly rough country. The rustlers had moved fast but careful, using knowledge of the land that came from intimate familiarity. Every hidden pass taken, every shortcut utilized. It was noon when they found the holding pen, cleverly concealed in a box canyon. Empty now, but the signs were clear. Hundreds of cattle had been held here recently. And more telling, the remains of a camp, coffee grounds, cigarette stubs, and coal. Ben held up a playing card, water-stained but readable. "Isn't this from that fancy deck Garrett bought in Cheyenne, the one with the golden eagles?" Before the Cole could respond, hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. They turned to find Deputy Hale and 3 men blocking the exit, guns drawn. Well, well. Hale's voice carried lazy menace. "The Morrison foreman, sniffing around where he shouldn't. Mr. Dorn said you might be a problem." "Since when do you work for Dorn?" Cole kept his voice level, hands visible but ready. "Since he pays better than the county. Drop your guns, boys. Slow and easy." Cole calculated odds. 4 against 4, but they had the drop. He nodded to his men, slowly unbuckling his gun belt. As he bent to place it down, he caught Ben's eye, saw the old hand's slight nod. Shame about those cattle. Hale continued. "But progress demands sacrifice. Railroad needs this land clear, and Dorn aims to provide it. Your boss should have taken his offer." "And Garrett had part of this progress." Hale laughed. "That boy thought he was so clever, feeding us information. Didn't realize he was just another tool. Dorn promised him the ranch once his father was ruined. Fool believed it." That was all the confirmation Cole needed. His hand found the hideout gun in his boot as Ben created a distraction, stumbling as if his frostbitten feet had failed. In the confusion, Cole drew and fired, catching Hale in the shoulder, spinning him around. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Jake, young but steady, put 2 shots into the nearest rider. Will dove behind rocks, laying down covering fire. Ben, despite his age, handled his pistol with deadly accuracy. When the smoke cleared, Hale was down along with 2 of his men. The 4th had fled. Cole retrieved his gun belt, ignoring the graze along his ribs where a bullet had come too close. "We need to get back," he said. "If Garrett's involved." "Sarah," Jake breathed. "He blames her for last night. If he thinks we're onto him..." They rode hard, horses laboring through the snow. Cole pushed aside the cold fear gripping his chest. Sarah could handle herself, had proven it, but Garrett with his back to the wall. His schemes falling apart, desperate men did desperate things. The Circle M appeared peaceful as they approached. Too peaceful. No smoke from the cookhouse chimney, no movement in the yard. Cole dismounted running, burst through the kitchen door to find chaos. Chairs overturned, flowers spilled across the floor. and blood not much, but enough speckling the white powder. "Sarah," the word tore from his throat. "Here," came a weak voice from behind the stove. He found her wedged into the corner, clutching a rolling pin smeared with blood. Her dress was torn, face bruised, but her eyes were fierce and alive. "Garrett!" Cole knelt beside her, hands gentle as they checked for serious injury. "Came with 2 men I didn't recognize. Said they needed to check the storeroom for evidence. I knew better." She winced as she shifted. "They didn't expect me to fight. Got one good with a rolling pin, another with hot grease from the stove. Garrett." "What about Garrett?" "Ran when he heard horses coming. But Cole, he took something from the storeroom. The breeding book. I think said something about insurance." Cole helped her stand, supporting her weight. "Where's Morrison, the hands?" Mr. Morrison rode to town early, before. Most of the hands are moving the surviving cattle. I don't know where." Shouting from outside cut her off. Through the window, Cole saw riders approaching fast. Silas Dorn led them, with Garrett Morrison beside him and a dozen hard-looking men behind. "Stay inside," Cole ordered. "Bar the door." "Like hell," Sarah said, grabbing the shotgun. "This is my kitchen, my home. I'm done running." Cole looked at her bruised, bloodied, but unbroken, and nodded. "Then we make our stand." They emerged together to find the riders spreading out, cutting off escape routes. Dorn sat his horse like a general surveying a battlefield. "Brennan," he called out, "you've been busy. Deputy Hale sends his regards." Well, he would if he could still talk. He talked plenty before the end. Cole replied, "Railroad survey, land grab, your whole scheme." Dorn shrugged. "Business is business. Morrison had his chance to sell. Now I'll take what I need." "Over my dead body," Sarah said, shotgun steady. "That can be arranged." Dorn's smile was winter cold. "Though it seems a waste. You'd make a fine addition to my household. Mrs. Whitman. I could use a woman with your spirit. The only spirit you'll get from me comes from this barrel." Movement caught Cole's eye riders approaching from the south. His heart sank, then soared as he recognized the lead figure, Morrison Sr., and behind him, what looked like half the town, including Marshal Pritchard from the county seat. "Garrett," Morrison's voice could have cracked stone. "You damn fool, boy. Thought you could sell out your own blood." Garrett's face went white. "Father, I can explain." "Explain to the marshal. He's already heard from 3 merchants you've been flashing money you didn't earn, and Mrs. Henderson at the hotel was very interested to describe the late-night meetings in Dorn's room." Dorn's confident smile faltered. "You've got nothing solid. Business meetings aren't illegal." "No," Marshal Pritchard said, riding forward. "But rustling is, and murder. Found Deputy Hale's body an hour ago, along with a very talkative survivor who's eager to testify in exchange for leniency." The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Dorn's men looked to their boss, hands hovering near weapons. The townsmen spread out, showing they'd come prepared for trouble. It was Garrett who broke first, spurring his horse toward the open prairie. He made it maybe 50 yards before his father's lasso caught him, yanking him from the saddle. The boy hit the ground hard and lay still. That broke Dorn's nerve. "Ride!" he shouted, wheeling his horse. The yard exploded into chaos. Gunfire, shouting, horses screaming. Cole pushed Sarah behind the water trough as bullets flew. She got off both barrels of the shotgun, dropping one of Dorn's men who'd gotten too close. When the dust settled, 3 men lay dead, several wounded. Dorn himself was captured, his horse shot from under him. Garrett sat in the dirt, hands bound. All arrogance drained away as he faced his father's terrible disappointment. "It's over," Morrison said, but he looked older, diminished. "Cole, see to the wounded. Mrs. Whitman, are you—" He trailed off. Seeing her bruised face, torn dress, the blood on her hands, his expression hardened further as he looked at his son. "She tried to stop me," Garrett said sullenly. "Got in the way." "No," Sarah corrected, voice steady despite exhaustion. "I defended what's mine, this kitchen, this job, this place I've made. And I'd do it again." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Cole, take her to town. Have Doc Morrison look at those injuries." "I don't need—" "Yes," Cole said firmly. "You do. Ben, you're in charge until I get back." As he helped Sarah onto his horse, holding her steady in front of him, she leaned back against his chest. "Is it really over?" "This part is. Dorn will hang or spend his life in prison. Garrett, that's for Morrison to decide. The ranch will survive." "And us?" The question was quiet, meant only for him. Cole's arms tightened around her. "We go forward, slow and proper, like you said, but forward." As they rode toward town, Sarah watched the sun break through the clouds, turning the snow-covered prairie into a field of diamonds. Behind them, the Circle M stood solid against the horizon. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah felt warm all the way through. Not just her body, safe in Cole's arms, but the frozen places inside beginning to thaw. It hurt, like feeling returning to frostbitten flesh. But it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that meant healing, the kind that meant you were still alive. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 6. Trail Through Snow. Asterisk, asterisk. The mountain pass loomed ahead like a gateway to judgment, its narrow track winding between walls of granite and ice. Cole pulled up his horse, studying the terrain with the careful eye of a man who'd learned that death often waited in beautiful places. Behind him, 15 men sat their mounts in grim silence, breath steaming in the frigid air. "This is it," he said to Ben Fletcher, who rode beside him. "If I were running stolen cattle with a blizzard on my heels, this is where I'd make my stand." Ben spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Been thinking the same. Question is, are they fool enough to still be here?" Morrison Sr. had taken a wound in the earlier confrontation, not serious, but enough to keep him at the ranch. He'd put Cole in charge of the pursuit, with orders simple as they were, hard recover what cattle they could, and ensure the night riders understood that Circle M property came with a price. "Jake!" Cole called to the young hand. "Take Will and scout the high ground. Watch for lookouts. Don't engage unless you have to." As the scouts moved off, Cole considered their position. They'd been tracking the night riders for 6 hours through increasingly difficult terrain. The stolen cattle, what remained after the storm, had been driven hard toward this pass. Beyond lay a maze of canyons that eventually opened onto the rail line. If the rustlers made it through, the cattle would be on a stock car to Chicago before anyone could stop them. "Riders coming," someone called out. But it was Jake returning, his face flushed with cold and excitement. "Found them. Mr. Brennan. Hold up about half a mile ahead where the pass narrows. Looks like they're having trouble. Some of their cattle are down, blocking the trail." "How many men?" "Counted 8, maybe 9. But Mr. Brennan, there's something else. That Dorn fellow's there. Saw him clear as day, giving orders." Cole felt his jaw tighten. They'd thought Dorn captured in the ranch fight, but in the chaos, he must have slipped away. "Armed. Like a military company. Saw at least 2 men with repeating rifles." Ben whistled low. "They're not planning to give up easy." "No," Cole agreed. "They're not." He gathered the men, sketching a rough map in the snow. "We can't take them head on. That narrow spot's a death trap if they hold it. But cattle need water, and the only source is the creek running along the eastern wall. If we cut that off, they'll have to move or watch the stock die." Ben finished. "And dead cattle don't bring money." "Exactly, Ben. Take 5 men around to the east. Get above them if you can. Rest of you with me. We'll pressure from this side. Make them think we're planning a frontal assault." "What about the women and children?" Will asked. "If they've got camp followers." "They don't," Jake said firmly. "No wagons, no camp gear beyond basics. This is a raiding party, not a settlement." Cole nodded, relieved. The last thing he wanted was innocents caught in crossfire. Bad enough what was coming for the men who'd chosen this path. They moved out as the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows across the snow. Cole led his group up a game trail that paralleled the main track, moving quiet as possible. Through the trees, he caught glimpses of the rustlers' position, a natural fortress where the canyon walls squeezed tight, leaving only a 20-foot gap plugged with desperate cattle and desperate men. The first shot came without warning, bark exploding from a pine inches from Cole's head. He rolled from his horse as more bullets whined overhead, finding cover behind a fallen log. "Stay down," he shouted as his men scrambled for cover. "They've got a sharpshooter." The rifle spoke again, this time catching one of the horses. The animal screamed and thrashed, adding to the chaos. Cole spotted the muzzle flash high up on the canyon wall. Perfect position to control the approach. "I can't move forward with him up there," someone muttered. Cole was already calculating angles, distances. The sharpshooter had good cover, but he'd have to expose himself to shoot down at them. It was a waiting game now. Patience against patience. A commotion from the past drew his attention. The cattle were stirring, bawling in distress. Ben's team must have reached the water source. Sure enough, within minutes, the rustlers were moving, trying to push their stolen herd deeper into the pass before they died of thirst. "That's our chance," Cole said. "When they move the cattle, that rifleman has to relocate or lose his angle on us. Tom, Jesse, when I give the word, put everything you've got on his position. Rest of you, we rush the gap." It was a risk. Everything depended on timing, on the rustlers being more concerned with saving their stolen goods than maintaining defensive positions. But Cole had learned that greed often trumped good sense, especially when money was already spent in a man's mind. The cattle surged forward, driven by thirsty desperation and rustler urgings. The sharpshooter held position for a moment. Then Cole saw him start to move, trying to maintain his commanding view. Now, rifles cracked in unison, splinters flying from the sharpshooter's position. Cole led the charge, snow flying from horses' hooves as they thundered toward the gap. For a moment, it seemed the plan would work perfectly. Then Silas Dorn himself appeared at the narrowest point, a repeating rifle in his hands and cold calculation in his eyes. The weapon spoke rapidly, lever working smooth as silk. A horse went down, its rider rolling clear. Another man cried out, clutching his shoulder. "Take cover," Cole shouted, but there was precious little to find. They were caught in the open, exactly where Dorn wanted them. Cole felt a bullet tug at his coat as he dove behind a cluster of rocks that offered minimal protection. This was how it ended. Then not in a bed surrounded by grandchildren he'd never have, but in a cold pass fighting for another man's cattle. The distinctive crack of a Sharp's rifle echoed off the canyon walls. The sharpshooter's position exploded in rock dust. Ben Fletcher, proving why he'd survived 40 years on the frontier, had found his own vantage point. "Pour it on, boys," the old hand shouted. "Let's show these thieves how Circle M fights." The battle became a confused melee of gunfire, shouting men and panicked cattle. The rustlers, caught between two forces, began to waver. Cole saw his chance and took it, spurring his horse through a gap in their line. He found himself face to face with Dorn, both men's guns empty. They crashed together, tumbling from horseback into the trampled snow. Dorn was heavier, but Cole was desperate, driven by thoughts of Sarah's bruised face, Morrison's trust, the code of the frontier that said a man defended what was his. They rolled, trading blows, neither able to gain clear advantage. Dorn's hands found Cole's throat, bearing down with killing pressure. Black spots danced in Cole's vision. His hand scrabbled in the snow, found a rock, brought it up in a short arc that caught Dorn behind the ear. The rustler leader collapsed, stunned but not dead. Cole staggered to his feet to find the battle largely over. 3 rustlers were down, the rest throwing away weapons and raising hands. The cattle milled aimlessly. Their brief taste of freedom ended. "Cole?" Jake's voice, high with alarm. "Ben's hit." Cole found the old cowboy propped against a rock, red spreading across his shirt. But Ben was smiling, the satisfied expression of a man who'd done his job well. "Just a scratch," he said, though his color suggested otherwise. "Got that sharpshooter good, didn't I? Haven't lost my eye." "Save your breath," Cole said, already tearing cloth for bandages. The wound was serious, but not immediately fatal if they could get him care. "Jake, ride hard for the ranch. Tell them to send the wagon and have someone fetch Doc Morrison from town." As Jake spurred away, Cole organized the survivors. The captured rustlers were bound and set to gathering their dead. The cattle were counted. They'd recovered most of what was taken. Those storm losses still hurt deep. Dorn stirred as they loaded him onto a horse, hands tied to the saddle horn. His fine clothes were ruined, face battered, but his eyes still held that calculating coldness. "This isn't over," he said. "I have friends, lawyers, money." "Maybe," Cole agreed. "But you also have Deputy Hale's testimony. If he lives, Garrett Morrison's too. Once he realizes saving his own neck matters more than whatever you promised him, and every rancher in the territory will testify about missing cattle that somehow ended up on trains your company arranged. You can't prove." "We don't have to prove. This is the territory. Dorn, judge and jury are men who've sweated for every acre, buried friends taken by rustlers, watched families ruined by theft. They'll look at evidence, sure, Tim, but mostly they'll look at you and see what you are." Dorn's face went pale as the implications sank in. In the cities, money could buy justice. Out here, justice had a rougher face. The ride back was somber despite their victory. Ben needed the wagon badly. His breathing labored and skin gray. Cole stayed close, talking to keep the old hand conscious stories of other trails, other fights, the promise of spring coming and easier days. "Been meaning to tell you," Ben said as they neared the ranch, "about you and Mrs. Whitman. You got my blessing. For what it's worth." Ben, "No, let me say it. Might not get another chance. She's a good woman who's had bad luck. You're a good man who's carried too much weight alone. Together you might make something worth having. It's complicated. Life's complicated. Death's simple. Choose complicated while you can." The Circle M appeared through the late afternoon shadows, smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney like a beacon. Men poured from the buildings as they approached. Word had spread. Morrison himself stood on the porch, one arm in a sling but very much in command. But it was Sarah that Cole's eyes found first. She stood in the kitchen doorway, shotgun in hand as if she'd been prepared to mount her own rescue. When she saw him, something passed over her face too quick to name. They got Ben inside and comfortable, the wound cleaned and dressed. Doc Morrison arrived as night fell, pronouncing the old hand too tough to die from one bullet. The captured rustlers were locked in the smokehouse under guard, awaiting the marshal's arrival. It was full dark when Cole finally made it to the kitchen. Sarah was alone, cleaning dishes from the meal she'd somehow managed despite the day's chaos. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her shoulders tense. "Ben will be all right," he said. "I know. Jake told me." She dried a plate with careful precision. "You recovered the cattle?" "Most of them, and Dorn's in custody. This time, he won't slip away." "Good." They stood in awkward silence, the easy companionship of recent days strained by what lay unspoken between them. The memory of that night in the storm, her warmth against him, her hand placing his over her heart seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "Sarah, I was afraid." The words came out rushed. as if she'd been holding them back by will alone. When Jake came riding in, saying you'd gone after them, that Dorn was there, I was afraid. She turned then, and he saw tears on her cheeks. Not the frozen inability to cry she'd carried for so long, but real tears, warm and human and healing. I can't do it again, she continued. Lose someone. Watch another man, She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish. Cole crossed to her in 2 strides, caught her hands in his. You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to die. Ask anyone. Thomas said that too. I'm not Thomas. He said it gentle but firm. I won't make promises I can't keep. Won't chase dreams that get us killed. What I will promise is this: every day I draw breath, I'll use it coming home to you, if you'll have me. She studied his face in the lamplight. This man who'd shown her warmth when she'd forgotten its existence. The men will talk. They'll say I'm using you, or you're taking advantage. Let them talk. We know the truth. He raised her hands to his lips, kissed each palm gently. Ben gave us his blessing, for what it's worth. Said to choose complicated while we can. Despite the tears, she almost smiled. Wise man. The wisest. So what do you say? Sarah Whitman, will you let me court you proper, slow and careful, like you said, but moving towards something real, instead of answering in words? She stepped into his arms. They held each other in the lamp-lit kitchen, surrounded by the familiar smells of coffee and bread, while outside the wind sang cold songs against the windows. But inside, warmth spread between them, not the desperate heat of survival, but the steady glow of 2 people choosing to thaw together, no matter how much it might hurt. When they finally parted, Sarah's tears had stopped. Her eyes were clear, resolved. Yes, she said simply. Yes, to all of it. From the main house came the sound of voices, Morrison dealing with prisoners, planning for tomorrow's challenges. The ranch would go on, weathering the storm as it had weathered others. But here in this kitchen, 2 people had crossed their own divide, choosing hope over fear, warmth over the safety of staying frozen. It was, Cole thought as he reluctantly prepared to leave, better than any victory won with guns. And as Sarah smiled, really smiled for the first time since he'd known her, he knew she felt it too. Spring would come, as it always did, but they wouldn't wait for it. They'd make their own warmth, one careful day at a time. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 7, Truth Before the Forge, asterisk, asterisk. The courthouse in Cheyenne stood like a monument to civilization's reach into the wilderness. Its brick walls and white columns a stark contrast to the raw timber buildings surrounding it. Cole sat in the witness chair, uncomfortable in his one good suit, watching as the territorial prosecutor laid out the case against Silas Dorn and his associates. Mr. Brennan, the prosecutor said, please tell the court what you discovered in the Box Canyon on February 15th. Cole spoke clearly, detailing the evidence: the military-style tracks, the hidden corral, the playing card from Garrett Morrison's deck. The courtroom was packed with ranchers and townspeople, all eager to see justice done. In the front row, Morrison Sr. sat stone-faced, the shame of his son's betrayal aging him 10 years in as many days. When Dorn's lawyer cross-examined, trying to paint Cole as a violent vigilante, Cole kept his responses measured. Yes, there had been gunplay. Yes, men had died, but only after they'd drawn first, only in defense of property and life. Isn't it true, the lawyer pressed, that you have a personal interest in this case, that you've been intimate with a certain member of the Morrison household? Cole felt heat rise in his neck, but kept his voice level. If you're referring to Mrs. Whitman, she's an employee of the ranch, same as me, a respected member of our community who was attacked in her own kitchen by men connected to your client. But you've been seen. Counselor, the judge interrupted. Unless you're suggesting Mr. Brennan's testimony is compromised, move on. This isn't a gossip column. The trial lasted 3 days. Deputy Hale, recovering from his wounds, testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony was damning names, dates, amounts paid, cattle stolen, officials bribed. The net swept wider than anyone had imagined, reaching into the territorial government itself. Garrett Morrison's testimony was perhaps the most painful to watch. The young man, all arrogance stripped away, admitted to feeding information to Dorn in exchange for promises of wealth and position. He'd believed he was clever, playing all sides, until the moment he realized he was just another tool to be discarded. He said my father was old-fashioned, Garrett testified, voice barely above a whisper. Said the future belonged to men of vision, men who understood progress. I wanted to matter. When the verdicts came down, they were swift and harsh. Dorn would hang, along with 3 of his men who'd killed during their rustling operations. Others received long prison sentences. Garrett, because of his cooperation and his father's influence, received 5 years likely to be served in a military prison where Morrison Sr. had connections. Outside the courthouse, Cole found Morrison standing alone, staring at the distant mountains. I failed him, the old man said without preamble. Pushed too hard, expected too much, made him feel like nothing he did was good enough. He made his choices. Cole replied, We all do. Yes? Morrison turned, and Cole saw a glimmer of the iron will that had built the Circle M from nothing. But we move forward. I want to talk to you about the future. The ranch needs strong leadership. I'm offering you a partnership, 40% ownership, full managing control. You've earned it. Cole felt the weight of the offer. It was more than he'd ever dreamed. Security and purpose combined. That's generous, sir. It's practical. I'm old. Cole, this whole mess showed me that. I need someone I can trust running things. Morrison's eyes sharpened. There's one condition. That woman, Mrs. Whitman. If you're serious about her, make it proper. This ranch doesn't need more scandal. Already planning on it, sir. Soon as she'll have me. Morrison almost smiled. Then we have a deal. Draw up the papers when we get back. The journey home took 2 days through country beginning to hint at spring. Snow still clung to north-facing slopes, but the southern exposures showed bare earth, and the streams ran high with melt. Jake rode with them. Full of stories from the ranch, Ben was recovering well, arguing with everyone about being confined to bed. The remaining hands had pulled together, work proceeding despite the losses. And Mrs. Whitman? Cole asked, trying to sound casual. Jake grinned. She's been cooking up a storm. Says it's for Ben's recovery. But she made your favorite molasses cookies yesterday. 3 batches. They reached the Circle M as sunset painted the sky purple and gold. Cole barely had time to stable his horse before Sarah appeared, wiping flour from her hands. She looked thinner, worry lines etched deeper, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. You're back. Told you I would be. They stood awkwardly, aware of watching eyes, until she turned practical. You're just in time for supper. Beef stew and cornbread. Ben's been asking for you, driving everyone crazy with his complaining. The kitchen was warm and full of familiar smells. As the men filed in for the evening meal, Cole saw how they looked at Sarah now, not just with the respect due a good cook, but with something approaching reverence. She'd held the ranch together during the crisis, and they knew it. After supper, Cole lingered as had become their custom, but this time, Morrison stayed too, surprising everyone. Mrs. Whitman, the old man said formally, I owe you an apology. My son's actions, the danger you faced, that's on me. I should have seen what was happening. Sarah's hands stilled on the dishes she was washing. We all missed it. Mr. Morrison. Garrett fooled everyone, including himself. Perhaps, but you paid a price for my blindness. Those bruises, the attack. Morrison cleared his throat. I'm raising your wages by half. And if you need anything at all, you come directly to me."
"That's not necessary."
"It is." Morrison's tone brooked no argument. "This ranch survives because of loyalty. Yours has been tested and proven. We reward that here." He left without waiting for response. Sarah stood frozen, dish towel in her hands. "Half again wages," she said softly. I could save enough to—" "To what?" Cole asked, though he feared the answer. "Nothing. It's just security. Something I've never really had." She resumed washing, movements sharp. "How was the trial?" Cole told her, watching her face as he described Garrett's testimony. Dorn's sentence, the wider corruption exposed. When he mentioned the partnership offer, she stopped again. 40%, Cole, that's a fortune. It's a responsibility, but yes, it means I can provide properly for a family if... He took a breath. "Sarah, I need to say something." She turned to face him fully, and he saw fear mix with hope in her eyes. "I know we said slow and careful," Cole continued, "but these past days, thinking I might lose you, thinking about what matters, Sarah, I don't want to waste time. I've found what I want, this place, this work, and you. If you'll have me, I'd like to make it official." The dish towel slipped from her hands. Is this a proposal?" "It's a declaration of intent." Cole managed a crooked smile. "The actual proposal will be better, I promise. When Ben's on his feet to witness. When I have a ring. When I can do it proper. But I wanted you to know where I stand, where my heart stands." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Cole felt each second like a year. Then she crossed to him, took his face in her hands still damp from dishwater. "Thomas proposed with flowers and poetry," she said. "Made all sorts of grand promises about the life we'd have. And I believed him, because I was young and flowers were pretty." Her thumbs traced his cheekbones. "I don't need flowers. Cole, I need truth. I need someone who'll stand with me when the storms come, who'll see me as a partner, not just a cook or a body to warm the bed. You are my partner, have been since that night you saved my life. Everything else is just making it official." She kissed him then, there in her kitchen kingdom with the lamplight golden around them. It was different from their desperate embrace during the blizzard. This was choosing, not survival. This was promise given and received. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Sarah laughed a sound he realized he'd never heard from her before, rich and real and warming as summer rain. "Yes," she said, "when you do it proper, with Ben watching and whatever ring you manage. My answer will be yes." From the bunkhouse came the sound of a harmonica, someone playing a waltz. Cole held out his hand. "Dance with me." "Here now." Why not? This kitchen scene, everything else, might as well see joy too. She took his hand, and they danced slowly in the small space between stove and table, her head on his shoulder, his arm secure around her waist. Through the window, stars emerged in the clear sky, bright as promises. "I've been thinking," Sarah said against his chest, "about spring, about planting a garden behind the kitchen, vegetables, herbs, maybe some flowers, putting down roots. I'll help. We'll make it the best garden in the territory. And maybe we could add on to the kitchen. A room for children, someday." Cole's arm tightened around her. They'd both lost so much, she, her husband, and babies. He, his sister, and innocence. But here, dancing in a kitchen that smelled of bread and hope. They were building something new from the ashes of old pain. "Someday," he agreed. "When you're ready, when we're ready." They danced until the harmonica faded, until the last cowboys headed for their bunks, until the stove needed banking for the night. Then Cole kissed her once more, soft and sure, before heading to the bunkhouse himself. Sarah stood in her doorway, watching him go. The night was cold still, but not bitter. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, answered by another across the valley. Spring was coming. She could feel it in the wind, in the way ice no longer formed inside the windows, in the ache of her own heart learning to beat again. She touched her lips where his kiss lingered, thinking of truth and promises, of partnerships forged in crisis and tested by fire. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Running a ranch was never easy, and the scars of recent betrayal would take time to heal. But tonight, she had danced in her kitchen with a good man who saw her truly. Tonight, she had said yes to a future neither of them could fully imagine, but both were willing to build. Sarah Whitman went to bed warm for the first time in memory, and her dreams were of gardens growing green in the sun. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 8. Season of new grass, asterisk, asterisk. Spring came to the Wyoming territory like a cautious visitor, testing the air before committing to stay. First, the south-facing slopes shed their snow, revealing brown grass that quickly greened under the strengthening sun. Then the creek swelled with snowmelt, singing loud songs after months of icy silence. Finally, on a morning in late April, Sarah woke to find the first wildflowers blooming beside the kitchen door. Tiny purple faces turned hopefully toward the dawn. She knelt beside them, touching the delicate petals with wonder. It had been 3 years since she'd noticed flowers. 3 years since beauty had registered as anything more than another fact of existence. But now, with dirt under her fingernails from planting her garden and Cole's promise warming her heart, the simple flowers seemed like a miracle. Prairie crocuses, Ben Fletcher said from behind her. The old cowboy moved carefully, still favoring his wounded side, but his color was good and his eyes bright. Always the first to show, brave little things. Like hope, Sarah said, then flushed at her own fancifulness. Exactly like hope. Ben settled onto the bench Cole had built beside the door. Speaking of which, that man of yours has been mighty mysterious lately. Him and Jake, thick as thieves, riding off on errands nobody needs done. Sarah smiled, returning to her bread-making. Cole's business is his own. And I suppose that's why he asked me about my late wife's ring size. Pure curiosity. Her hand stilled in the dough. Ben, don't worry, girl. Your secret's safe. Just wanted you to know Molly would be pleased. She always said that ring should go to someone who understood its weight. Love and loss all twisted up together, like gold wire. The old man's eyes were distant, seeing another spring, another woman. Sarah dusted flour from her hands and sat beside him. Tell me about her. Ben smiled. Molly McBride. Irish as they come, hair like sunset and a temper to match. Met her in St. Louis after the war. I was just another broke soldier heading west, and she was working in her father's store. Took one look at her and knew I was done for. Love at first sight. Lord, no. She threw me out twice before agreeing to walk out with me. Said I looked like trouble in boots. Ben chuckled. She wasn't wrong, but we made it work. 30 years we had. Good years, mostly. Hard ones, too. But we faced them together. How did she, if you don't mind? Fever, summer of '75. We were living in Kansas then. Doctor said there was nothing to be done. She faced it like she faced everything straight on. No flinching. Ben was quiet for a moment. Last thing she said was to find someone else to fuss over. Took me 6 years to wind up here, fussing over all you fools. Sarah took his weathered hand in hers. We're lucky to have you. Get on with you. That bread won't need itself, and we've got a celebration to prepare. The celebration was Morrison's idea, a spring gathering to mark survival and new beginnings. Every ranch within a day's ride was invited, along with townspeople from Dry Creek. It was partly social, partly business, but mostly it was the frontier's way of declaring victory over another hard winter. Sarah had been cooking for days. The smokehouse yielded its treasures of ham and beef, the root cellar its last precious vegetables. She'd made pies until she ran out of dried apples, then switched to molasses cakes. Jake proved invaluable, his bear-sign frying skills now legendary among the hands. Mrs. Whitman, Jake said as they worked side by side. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you marry Mr. Brennan, what should I call you, Mrs.? Brennan seems strange, since I've known you as Mrs. Whitman all this time. Sarah paused in her pie crimping. The question was one she'd been pondering herself. To take Cole's name felt like closing a door on Thomas, on the life they'd tried to build, but to keep Whitman seemed like clinging to ghosts. I think, she said slowly, you should call me whatever feels right. Names are just words. Jake, what matters is the respect behind them. The young man nodded seriously. My ma would like you. She says the same kind of things, deep thoughts disguised as common sense. Your mother sounds wise. You should visit her soon. Planning on it, Mr. Brennan said I could take a week come summer, ride home for my sister's wedding. Jake's face lit up. He's a good boss. Mrs. Whitman, fair. Treats us like men, not just hired hands. He is that, Sarah agreed, warmth spreading through her chest. The day of the gathering dawned clear and perfect. By noon, wagons and riders filled the yard. Women in their best dresses clustered near the house, exchanging recipes and gossip. Men gathered by the corral, discussing cattle prices and the railroad's latest movements. Children, freed from winter's confinement, ran wild between the buildings. Sarah found herself at the center of a group of ranch wives, her kitchen credentials earning instant respect, Mrs. Henderson from the double bar shared her secret for keeping biscuits light at altitude, Mrs. Johansson from Swede Creek offered dried lingonberries from her precious hoard. We heard about your trouble with the rustlers, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying the mix of sympathy and curiosity that fueled frontier gossip. Must have been terrifying. It was challenging, Sarah admitted, but we survived. And I hear you're to be married to that handsome foreman. This from young Mrs. Davis, married only 6 months herself and eager for romantic news. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mr. Brennan and I have an understanding. The women exchanged knowing looks, but their smiles were kind. Out here, second chances at happiness were understood, even celebrated. Too many women wore black, too many men rode alone. As afternoon wore toward evening, Morrison called for attention from the porch. The old man looked better than he had in months. The successful resolution of the rustler threat and the spring air combining to restore some vitality. Friends, neighbors, he began. We gather to celebrate survival. This winter tested us hard. We lost cattle, we lost trust. Some of us lost family to greed and foolishness. A pause, heavy with the weight of Garrett's absence. But we endured. We're still here, still fighting, still building something worth having in this hard land. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I want to recognize someone, Morrison continued. Cole Brennan has been my foreman for 3 years. In that time, he's proven himself in every way a man can. So I'm making it official. Cole is now a full partner in the Circle M, 40% owner, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The crowd erupted in cheers and congratulations. Cole, standing near the corral, looked genuinely surprised by the public announcement. Men slapped his back, shook his hand, but Sarah saw how his eyes searched for her. Found her, held, and Morrison raised his voice over the noise. Since we're making announcements, I believe Mr. Brennan has something to say. The crowd quieted, sensing drama. Cole made his way through the parting people until he stood before Sarah. Her heart hammered as he dropped to one knee, producing a small leather box from his coat. Sarah Whitman, he said, voice carrying clear in the sudden silence. You saved my life in a blizzard. You stood beside me against rustlers and storms. You've brought warmth back to places I thought frozen forever." He opened the box, revealing a gold ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Sarah's vision blurred with tears, warm tears, healing tears, tears that proved her heart had fully thawed. Around them, the crowd held its breath.
"Yes,"
she said, voice strong despite the tears.
"Yes, Cole Brennan, I'll marry you."
He slipped the ring onto her finger, Ben's Molly's ring. She realized, recognizing the unusual setting. Then Cole was standing, kissing her while the crowd erupted in celebration. Women dabbed at eyes, men whistled and stomped, children clapped without quite understanding why. "About time," someone shouted Jake, from the sound of it. The party continued into evening with renewed energy. A fiddle appeared, then a harmonica, and soon couples were dancing on the packed earth of the yard. Cole led Sarah through a waltz, both of them laughing at their own clumsiness. "When?" she asked as they swayed together. "Soon as you like. Tomorrow if you want. Or we could wait for full summer. Have a proper church wedding in town." Sarah considered. "June," she decided. "When my garden's in full bloom. When the world's green and growing. June it is." As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Sarah found herself on the porch with Ben and several of the ranch women. The men had gravitated toward the corral where Morrison was showing off a new stallion. Children were being rounded up by tired mothers, protesting the end of freedom.
"Going to be strange, having a woman's touch in the main house."
"Mrs. Henderson observed, that place has been all male territory since Morrison's wife passed." Sarah started. In all the planning, she hadn't considered where she and Cole would live. The foreman's quarters were attached to the bunkhouse, unsuitable for a married couple. But the main house? "We'll work it out," she said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "Course you will," Ben said firmly. "Morrison's already planning. Mentioned something about fixing up the old wing, the part that's been closed since his wife died. Make it proper quarters for a married foreman and the family that'll surely follow." Family? The word sent a flutter through Sarah's stomach. She'd buried 2 babies with Thomas, tiny beings who'd never drawn breath. The doctors in Kansas had warned her body might not carry another. But here, with new life stirring all around and Cole's ring warm on her finger, hope seemed possible. The evening wound down slowly. Wagons were loaded with sleeping children and tired women. Men made plans for shared cattle drives and mutual aid during haying season. Sarah stood with Cole, accepting congratulations and good wishes until her face hurt from smiling. Finally, as the last wagon rolled away under a blanket of stars, they were alone. "No regrets?" Cole asked, arm around her waist. "None, you." "Only that I didn't ask sooner." They walked slowly toward the kitchen, her domain that would soon no longer be solely hers. Inside, embers still glowed in the stove. Sarah added wood, setting coffee to heat out of habit. "I've been thinking," Cole said, settling into what had become his chair. "About the future. The partnership means we'll have income beyond wages. Enough to build our own house if you want, somewhere on the property but separate." Sarah poured coffee, considering.
"Would you want that your own place?"
"I want what makes you happy. Some women need their own territory, especially women who've been independent. Others want the security of the main house, the established gardens and wells." She sat across from him, steam rising between them. "I think I'd like to try the main house first. Ben says there's a whole wing unused. We could make it ours while still being part of the greater whole, and my garden's already started here." Cole smiled. "Practical woman. I like that." "You'd better. You're marrying me." They talked late into the night, planning in the way of people who've learned not to count too heavily on the future but can't help hoping anyway. Where would they live? How would they manage the household? What changes would marriage bring to their daily rhythms? Practical questions mixed with dreams. Children, maybe. If God was willing. A larger garden. Perhaps a small orchard in that sheltered spot below the spring. Finally, Cole rose to leave. At the door, he paused, pulling her close for a kiss that promised everything words couldn't capture. "June," he said against her lips. "Seems a lifetime away." "It'll come faster than you think. Spring's always the busiest season." After he left, Sarah banked the fire and climbed to her small room for one of the last times. Soon she'd be moving to the main house, to rooms that had known another woman's joys and sorrows. The thought should have been daunting, but instead, she felt only anticipation. She undressed slowly, hanging her good dress with care. The ring caught lamplight as she moved, sending tiny rainbows across the walls. Ben had been right, it carried weight, this symbol of love that had outlasted death. But it was good weight, like rich soil on a shovel or a full bucket from a deep well. Sarah Whitman, soon to be Brennan, blew out the lamp and settled into bed. Outside, a nightbird called, answered by its mate across the valley. The sound was like a promise winter ends. Spring comes. Life continues. Hearts that freeze can thaw. Women too cold to cry can learn to weep with joy. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and brave enough to risk the warmth, you get a second chance at happiness, here in this hard land that broke the weak and buried the careless. Sarah had found something worth having work, purpose, community, and love. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. There was bread to bake, a ranch to run, a wedding to plan, a life to build. But tonight, wrapped in darkness and dreams, Sarah smiled. She was no longer too cold to cry. She was exactly warm enough to live. Dawn broke golden over the grasslands, painting the world in shades of hope and promise. In her kitchen, Sarah rose to meet it, ring glinting on her finger as she built up the fire, coffee to brew, biscuits to make, men to feed. But first, a moment to stand in her doorway and watch the light spill across the prairie like honey, sweet and golden and full of tomorrow's possibilities. In this land, she would tell her children someday, we survive on kindness, discipline, and the fire we carry in our hearts. Never let that fire go cold. Never be too proud to seek warmth when you need it. And always, always remember spring comes to those who endure winter. The bell rang, calling the ranch to another day. Sarah smoothed her apron and went to meet it, carrying warmth with every step. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts with our community. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of love, survival, and redemption on the frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more people discover these heartfelt stories of the American West. Until next time, partners, keep riding and keep your hearts warm.